Hey there, I'm Brad Miller, and today with Jason Medford, and we are walking the spiritual path with you. And today I want to pose a question, and it's something that maybe sounds you may have an initial gut reaction to it, but I want you maybe to think about it a minute before you actually answer. And here's the question is this: Is murder inherently bad? Is murder, taking the life of someone else, is murder inherently bad? Jason, what do you think?
Well, it's interesting because, yeah, one of the speeches I'm working on is an ethics training. And so obviously things like murder or killing somebody comes up or is a great way of kind of describing some of the context. And so again, I'm sure most of the people that are listening are like, no, murder is bad, right? But I'm thinking maybe kind of, take apart the words a little bit.
Mhm.
Murder has, and again, you know better than I do, Brad, from a legal perspective, how murder is actually defined versus killing. Because there seems to be some different energy and a little bit different meanings behind the word murder versus killing, right? And so um, I know, when I talk about ethics and I talk about virtue ethics from the Greek philosophies, a lot of it is not the act, but it's the virtue behind the act. It's the intention behind the act that determines the rightness or the wrongness of something. Okay.
Mhm.
And so that's why, using things like murder or killing is an extreme to help people understand the concept. Right.
Right.
And so if you, kill somebody because you want to rob them and take their money, well, that's kind of one facts and circumstances. If you kill somebody because you're in war and you're killing the enemy, that seems to be different, right? The one we send people to jail, maybe capital punishment if you're in a state that has that, and people think that that's the right thing to do, but we give people medals for killing people in war, right?
Mhm.
Because we're so proud of it. And so is murder inherently bad? I would say no. But I know a lot of people would disagree with me on this.
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
let's kind of talk about it because, and again, some of you that are listening are like, how does this have anything to do with spirituality? Don't worry.
We'll get
you,
there.
you will
We'll
get
we'll get
there.
there.
We're gonna get
Yeah.
there.
So the point that you made about different kind of degrees or whatever like that. So from a legal standpoint, there are different degrees, talking about killing versus murder. Generally murder, you're talking about taking the life of someone else. And the point you made from the legal standpoint, we talk about the intent. Did you intend to kill the person? Was it something like you said it happened while you were committing it, robbing them, and the gun that you were threatening with went off? That's something different than if you went up to them, walked up behind them, and pulled the trigger, right? Um, which is completely different than somebody on the other side of the field and you taking your gun and shooting them that way. All different things again based on the intent, and depending on what that intent is, we have different categories, and where you've got kind of this premeditated. I planned it out. I wanted to kill them. I took the time and that kind of a murder, to the accidental murder, to I was driving my car and I crashed into someone else and the person died, like all the different levels. But for purposes of here, I guess I'm thinking probably more of the you intend to kill somebody,
Mhm.
you know. Is that inherently bad? And I think most people, when they first hear that question posed, the initial reaction was, well, of course, killing is bad, murder is bad, right? Um, if you break it down like you did, where you're thinking, well, what about war? then they're like, okay, well, maybe that's, I don't really, maybe I don't consider that murder, right? That's, that's killing in battle. So that's not really murder. They're trying to kill me. So it's only fair. Or if it's self-defense, somebody's trying to shoot at me, I'm just trying to help protect myself and avoid my life being, so they may start making distinctions that way. But I think from a big picture standpoint, people are probably going to say, generally speaking, going up and killing somebody in most circumstances is bad. It's a bad thing. So, and I know you said you don't think it's inherently bad, and maybe we need to break that down as inherent versus, not inherent. I think inherent meaning on its surface, just because of what it is, it's bad.
Mhm.
Um, why do you say that it's not inherently bad? We'll start
Mm.
there.
I'll get to play the other side on this one. Well, I think it's, what's one of the things that's difficult for us as humans from a spiritual perspective is having perspective,
Mhm.
right? Because we are in a 3D body, in a 3D world. We are living linear time. We see things with a defined start and end, right? And things like, the start of our life of birth, the death, the end of our life, right? As
Very
death.
linear. Yeah.
Very linear, and a lot of people are really they're afraid to die because they believe that they will cease to exist, right? Where we know that that's not the case. We are all eternal. We have lived effectively forever and will live forever, just in different forms, right? And in different lives, learning different things as we are growing and evolving ourselves. That's the bigger perspective, right? And so that's why people with a perspective, um, oh boy, here we go. Okay. Uh, with that bigger perspective, that are usually, we'll just say religious, right? Because a lot of people who are religious and believe in a life after death, they're not scared about death as much as people who are atheistic and think that we would completely cease to exist, right? Because there's a different perspective. And even again, the religious people believing there is life after death, but believing in a heaven and a hell. And so I have to do all the good things. I can't sin here, right? That gives them a different perspective for living their life versus maybe somebody who's more from a spiritual nature and realizes it's not exactly like how the Bible teaches. It is and it isn't, and it's more, and there's different things to think about, but that because of that difference in perspective, death is not as big of a deal, right?
Mhm.
And so how one dies in the bigger scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. And in fact, this is one thing that's hard for people to wrap their heads around is how how you die was probably agreed to before you came to this world. And we have to experience every different thing. In our different lifetimes, we experience different things for our growth, right? We have to know what it's like to be white, black, red, yellow, right? And I'm meaning from skin tones, right? We have to have lived as men, as women, died and been raped and all these different things that again we think of as bad things, but they're neutral. They're experiences that help us learn and help us evolve. They're things that create karmic debts that we have to pay back or that create karmic benefits, right? And that's part of the difference is kind of the intention behind it on how the karma kind of stacks up. a little bit. But that's why, again, it's like how you leave this world doesn't matter. And I think, I told you before, I am going to get going here because sorry, there's stuff that in a past life, I'm sure in many, but I know of one in particular that I'm aware of. I was assassinated. I was killed. I was murdered, right, by someone who was very close to me, someone who knew better, but still took me out. That's okay, right? It's okay. Now, because of the nature in which this happened, they had a karmic debt for doing that they have to pay. Nothing to do with me, right? But eventually they have to pay that. And hopefully, because this happened a long time ago, hopefully they've taken care of that in other lives, right? But it doesn't matter. And as the one who was killed, I don't need to necessarily hold it against the person who killed me either, because doing that damns me. And when I say damns me, damn is not a bad word. It just means blocked. And so if you allow yourself to stay in certain emotions and hold on to things and not let go of things, it dams your progress until you can let it go. And so I'll give you the rest of the story, which
Paul
that's why
Harvey.
it was like, oh, really? So we usually record a couple of episodes the same day, and they often go out in the same order. So if this holds true, then if you listened to last week's episode, you heard the first part of the story, which was that my brother Jared died tragically when he was 13, when I was 15. Okay. Well, so now you get the rest of the story because it actually ties in with what we're talking about today. So we lived out in the country, far away. That and my brother's best friend actually lived maybe a half a mile from us, very close from a country perspective.
Sure. Yep.
And so usually we would, after school, we come home. We were supposed to do our homework, whether we
Sure.
did or not, whatever, right?
Hmm.
But we could play or go over to our friends' houses, but we needed to be back home when my mom got home from work, right? Because that was supposed to be dinner time, be
Hmm.
back home then. And so Jared, one day, we're uh my mom gets home, he's not home. He's not back from his friend's house. And it was one of those days where I was home, I was doing something anyway. And so he wasn't there. So of course my mom starts to get a little annoyed,
Hmm.
angry about the fact he knows the rules, he's supposed to be home, blah 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 blah.
Hmm.
And she's been home for maybe, I don't know, not very long, maybe 10, 15 minutes, something like that. And all of a sudden we get a knock on the door, or a ding dong, because we had the doorbell. Ding, 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 ding,
Oh, the
ding,
fancy one.
ding, ding, ding. One of those. That was our doorbell. So it rang. So we opened the door, and it was a man flashing a badge that said there had been an accident. And it was a coroner. It
Hmm.
wasn't even a policeman, it was a coroner. And so, my mother, obviously distraught, but wanting to make sure this isn't a joke because she couldn't really believe it. She made the guy come in, took his card. She called the place and said, "Does this person really work for you?" Sort of a thing. Like, and so that happened, right? There was an accident, and the accident was this: my brother and his friend were looking at his dad's guns, and one of them went off and hit my brother in the head and killed him. Now, that shouldn't have happened. Why? Because I know the kind of gun it was. that kind of gun just does not accidentally go off very easily. Both of them, we grew up with guns. We knew gun safety. You don't look at a loaded gun. You unload it, then you load it
Hmm.
back. And as his friend was putting the gun away, it went off. Not a coincidence, a synchronicity. Because I think I told you before, my brother's time was done in this world. He had accomplished what he needed to do. Now, the sad thing, his friend was holding the gun, right? So here we have his best friend accidentally killed my brother. Now, for a lot of people, again, that can bring up lots of emotions, everything else, right? And the fact that his friend had to go through that experience and all the stuff that it meant for him, that my family had to go through that experience and all the things that it meant for us. Why? It seems a little unfair, but it's not, because it's what we all chose. It's what needed to happen for our growth. I am a different person because my brother Jared died when he was 13 and I was 15. That was a pivotal point in my life. There was things that I had to learn from it. Now his friend, right, and the rest of the story, and my family, right? Again, a lot of people would have been like, "You blankety blank blank blank, you killed my son." Absolutely not. You know what the first thing was that my mother did when she saw his friend?
Give him a
Gave
hug.
him a hug. It said, "We know it's not your fault, and we're so sorry that you have to go through this." Because it fucked with this kid.
Mm.
I mean, even it wasn't from us,
Mm-mm.
but the whatever he had to carry for a while
Mm.
was hard, but it's what he had chosen because it's part of the bigger cosmic path, right? And I saw him, later. Like I said, he was 13 at the time too, and I saw him later, probably when he was early 20s. We bumped into each other because the family moved away, obviously because of an incident happening in their house and people around him, and anyway,
Sure.
whatever. So they chose to move on. So I didn't see him for a while, but it was the same thing. When I saw him again, as a young man, I could tell that he was still carrying some of this with him because he was almost a little embarrassed to uh, to see me. Didn't know
Mm.
how to react, but it was the same thing. I went up and gave him a hug and the same sort of thing. It's not his fault. It was part of life. It's just what happened. But it gave lessons and healing and growth for my family and for his family as well. Again, it's like a lot of people could say, well, this is where sometimes people who are atheists are like, I can't believe that if there's a loving God up there, that they would allow a 13-year-old to accidentally kill their friend and have to deal with all of that in their life. That just can't be. There can't be a loving God if that's the case. And with a short-term perspective, I understand and I have appreciation for why people may feel that way. But if you step back and you have a bigger perspective, then you understand more why these things happen, right? There's lots of different ways my brother could have gone out of this world. He could have
Mm.
just not woken up one morning. there's
Yep.
there's any myriad of ways that he could have gone, but he chose that, or that's what was chosen, right? Because of everyone around the situation, what we needed to learn, what we had to go through, maybe if there were karmic debts that we were paying, I don't know, right? But it's we always tend to look on the the bad side or judge and label things as bad when sometimes the things that we absolutely did not want to happen, thank God for unanswered prayers, sort of a thing. And most of the struggles and the trials and the other things that we go through actually end up being our best lessons, and the most growth comes from it. So, is murder inherently bad? No, not on the bigger grand scheme of things. There's a reason why it happens. But in a limited context, I understand why people would say it's bad.
Mhm.
So I didn't think I was
Yeah.
going there on this episode. That didn't even come in. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, really? Okay, I've got to talk about this. Okay. All right. Okay. So there we go. There's the rest of the story.
Kind of hard to follow up with after that one. There's a lot
Well,
to take in with that story.
the first time you hear it, yes. I've had
Hmm.
quite a few years to process and understand it and deal with it and live it. So yeah, maybe it's
Yeah.
not quite as charged for me now,
Sure.
but I think it's, and this goes back again to a lot of bad things, that people like to judge or put as good or bad.
Hmm.
Are they really? Are they really? If we think about it from a different perspective. And
Hmm.
it's the same thing because I know this kind of came up because Brad had seen a social media post and was kind of going back and forth on it where somebody
Hmm.
posed something similar. And it's um, cancer, all kinds of different things, right, that end up coming into people's lives. It's a blessing, right? Because even like this, if somebody's life may be cut short, there's probably a blessing to it that we don't even know about, that we'll never know about, right? But a tragic murder of someone at the what seems to be the prime of their life, we may think, oh my goodness, that's horrible. But maybe they were at the top of their career at that point, and had that not happened to them, the rest of their life they would have spun out of control with depression and drug and alcohol abuse and fading off and having the rest of their life, be miserable and suffering from that. So is it more humane? Is it better that they got taken in a tragic way to begin with? Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. I don't have the answers to it.
Yeah.
But I do remember, one movie that I watched, and I don't even remember what the movie was, but it was something had happened. There were these two guys, and one that was on the ground. He was mortally wounded. So he wasn't making it out of whatever. And I think a fire was starting or something was coming. And I remember him begging his friend to finish him off so his body didn't have to go through the pain and torture of being burned.
Mm.
So is that murder? Is that killing? Is that bad? When someone else asks you to do it. I don't know. I mean, again, it's like we can, from a limited 3D perspective, we like to judge everything, and we judge it based on a short term view and based on the beliefs that we have been taught.
Hmm. Yep.
And if we can get out of those basic beliefs and increase our time horizon, we can understand some of these things that seem to be unjust, but that really are not in the bigger scheme of things.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean that's kind of the crux of the question that I posed at the beginning is what perspective are you looking at this from? If you are looking at this from the immediate, short term, here and now sort of stuff, yes, I'm sure it sucked for the person who, the loved ones of that person. I'm sure, the people, the friends and family and all those people, I'm sure it's a rough situation, and especially in the immediate aftermath of the situation. I mean, I'm sure you guys felt too with your brothers immediately after. It was devastating. Like just the emotions and the pain and all the things happened. But now you've had time to process all of it. You've had time to integrate the lessons that you received from this experience. And so now with a different perspective, you can look back at it and say, you know what? Yep, that was a pretty terrible, sucky time. Like that was just miserable, and you know what? It was awful. But I'm glad that I went through it because I've come out the other side better off for it. And I've heard people that have talked about who have had illness. One of our mentors, had a stroke and heart failure in the same year, and which is pretty rough. I mean, one of them is pretty rough in a lifetime, but to have both in the same year within a 12-month period, to have both, I'm sure that going through it was terrible, having to deal with all of it and recovery and the hospitals, all that kind of stuff. But he continues to maintain that this is the best, one of the best things that could ever happen to him, and he would never not trade the experience for anything in the world because of the lessons he learned from it.
Yeah.
And from this perspective he has now, he's like, you know what, this was a blessing for me that I got to experience. Not that I was a victim, but that I got to experience these things.
Yeah. Well, I think, at the beginning we told you how we're going to tie this back into spirituality. I think that's again part of it
Mhm.
that we've been trying to share almost in every episode is, can you flip it around? Can you see things from a different perspective? Can you see these things that most people would judge as something bad and horrible and oh, I feel sorry for you, right? I feel sorry for you is such a low frequency. It's a frequency of sorrow, and nobody
Mhm.
needs to be there, or at least for very long. Yes, we have to process things, but get out of it as quick as you can. Don't feel sorry for other people. Don't feel sorry for yourself, right? It's not a good place to be. And the quicker that we can actually see these things as blessings, learn from them, let them go, but realize, like you said, it's a blessing. I've gone through a lot of different things in my life that most people don't know about. I don't share most of it with people. In fact, I've only shared these stories about my brother a couple times in my life, probably with other people.
Now the whole world knows about them, but
Publicly, right? Now it's recorded and
right.
the whole world can hear it, right? But it's I've gone through a lot of different things, and it's the same thing. I did not enjoy going through some of the things I've gone through. I did not enjoy it. And there were times, there's a famous thing in the Bible of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane where he's like, you know, take this from me. This is pretty heavy. It's pretty heavy what I'm going through. Do I really have to go through it? Right? But then it's like, no, we let go, right? We just let go and we go through it. We face it. We go through it because on the other side is something greater, and the quicker we can learn how to do that and start seeing everything as opportunities instead of as curses, and change our perspective, have that bigger eternal perspective, then we'll see that pretty much nothing matters in the grand scheme of things. And again, not to be a nihilist, that's not what I'm saying, right? I'm not even going there because actually that's a whole interesting thing for another stuff that I learned about Nietzsche recently. And it was like, whoa, then that whole nihilist path that he went down. But what it means is in the grand scheme of things, most things have very little impact. And that's why everything always has been, is now, and always will be okay.
Hmm.
Everything is okay
Yep.
because we're going through them for a reason. And like you said, the mentor that you were referring to, I've seen changes in him as a result of it. I've seen him experience other things too. And it's the same thing. It's like, man, I wouldn't wish some of these things on other people, but I can see how he's benefited from it. I see how I've benefited from some of the things that I've had to go through. Even though at the time it's like, Father, let this cup pass
Hmm.
before me. I don't want to have to drink it, sort of a thing. But it's like, no, I'm a warrior. I do it. I'll do the work. I'll fight the fight. I'll live through whatever that happens to be that I need to because I need to learn something. I need to evolve from it. I need to grow from it, both myself and again, even people watching our examples.
Hmm.
There's benefit in that too, right? Is how we choose to respond and others see it and can be inspired one way or another from it as well.
Hmm.
Um, so,
Yeah. At risk of this going really, really long, I do want to just talk about one thing that you did mention, I don't know, 10 minutes ago. Um, you talked about the fact that we chose these things.
mhm,
That those are things that we had kind of agreed to. I'm for those who caught that when you said it, I can just picture like twitches going on. People are like, well, why would I ever choose to go through cancer or have heart failure or be go through being raped or any of these other terrible things? Why would I choose for any of this to happen to me?
mhm. Because it's what you needed to learn. And so, yeah, I'll try to give a little bit here. But yeah, like you said, this is a whole nother episode too, which is
Hmm.
I'm going to have you imagine something. And it maybe happened a lot more like this than you might believe. But after we leave any existence, we go, we heal for a little while, we do some other things, and then it comes a time that it's time for us to choose our next assignment,
Our next adventure.
our next adventure, choose our adventure. Some people use the word blueprint. And so what kind of happens is, we talk to people who are our guides, mentors, whatever words you want to use, angels, about, hey, it's time for me to go back and incarnate again in a body. Great. What do you want to learn this time, Jason? Well, let's see. What progress have I been making before? What are the things that you think that I need to do here? To kind of improve myself in these different areas. And then we pick. There's certain assignments. There's certain roles that we have in uh, the play of life. And so imagine it as if, again, we're in a theater production and there's certain roles and everybody wants to play the leading man or leading woman, right? In these roles. So everybody fights for those roles. But I'll tell you, a lot of what makes the art in movies and theater is not necessarily the starring actors, but a lot of the supporting actors as well. And behind all the supporting actors and the people that you see on the stage, there's lighting people, there's people that make the sets, there's people that sell the tickets, there's people that do the marketing for it. There's lots of people, right? Again, just actually sit through the credits at the end of a movie. Sit through all of the credits and look at how many people it took to make that movie.
Hmm.
And every part is important because if the production accountant isn't there to pay the bills, it doesn't work. right? They get credit in the credits, but nobody knows who they are. But
Mhm.
it's just as important of a part as the leading man or woman. And so in order to experience everything there is about this play, about this movie, we need to accept different roles at different times to learn certain things. And so there are kind of predefined blueprints, if you will, that we choose. And we say, yep, you know what? I'm going to pick this one because I need to work on this and this and this and this and this. And it's going to put me in proximity of these people. And we're all kind of going together in this particular area because we've got this other work to do, but we also have our 3D lives to play out, which is helping us to grow spiritually as well. And so the short answer is yes, we picked it. Now, somebody going through cancer and in pain, or somebody who's been raped, they don't want to hear that.
Right.
They don't want to hear that. And I understand. Hell,
Hmm.
when I've been going through the stuff I've been going through, I wouldn't have wanted to hear that as well. But we choose it. And then how we choose to deal with it, or, depends on whether we grow or don't grow.
Hmm.
And, and again, we experience these different things in different lives so we can grow more compassionate too, and understanding and loving of other people, because it's just like in this world, right? If someone has been raped, they have more compassion and understanding and can help others who have also been raped heal because they know what it's
Hmm.
like. They
Hmm.
went through the process, they healed, they help other people heal.
Hmm.
People who have near death experiences, right? By themselves. That's why other people who have had near death experiences help people who are having or have had near death experiences to work through it,
Hmm.
right? Because we have an understanding, we have a compassion, we have love. And so, that's where, again, it's like we do choose these things and it's for a reason. But if you choose to only think of it in a short, linear, 100-year period in a 3D body on this planet that we call Earth, Pachamama, then you're not going to understand it. And it's
Hmm.
going to seem unfair. And you're going to want
Hmm.
to judge it
Yep.
until you can expand that horizon.
Yeah.
So
No,
that's a short answer.
it's a short answer for a long topic. No, exactly.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah, again,
it's mind blowing for me,
yeah.
because again, if we only try to think about this in our linear time, in our physical body, in our conscious mind, it's
Hmm.
hard to grasp things because we're finite here, but everything is infinite. And so it's hard for a finite mind to truly
Hmm.
understand or capture something that is infinite.
Hmm. Yeah. Like I said, it goes back to the perception, the perspective that you're looking at. You know, if you're just looking at the little picture, it's going to look a lot different. I mean, I'm sure everyone's you've seen those pictures, online or something like that, where it's like, a very really zoomed in picture of like the parts of a flower or something, and they're like, identify with, can you tell if what this picture is of? And then you're supposed to guess what it is, and it looks like, like a swamp or something, trees or whatever, and then they zoom out, and then you get to see what it actually is. Um, it's like that. When you're in there, where you're just seeing the little bumps and the ridges and these weird protuberances and things, you're like, what alien planet is this? Like, I don't understand this at all. But then when
Mhm.
you zoom out and you're like, oh, that was just a flower petal. Like that was just the pollen in the flower and the stamen and all those other parts of the flower in there. Like that change in perspective can make things a lot clearer for you where they didn't make any sense at all from your former perception. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of kind of analogizing it. Because anytime that we're judging, anytime that we're saying something is bad or good,
Hmm.
it's
Yeah,
because
goes both ways.
we're judging a neutral thing based on, being so zoomed in on it and finite.
Myopic
And
view
it
of it. Yeah.
yeah, and so if we can get rid of the myopic view by stepping back and
Hmm.
seeing the bigger picture, then all of a sudden it starts to make more sense.
Hmm.
Right. And again, it's like, imagine, if you're looking at that picture and you're right up next to it and then you move back 5 feet, different perspective.
Hmm.
Now, if you move back 1,000 feet, different perspective.
Hmm.
Now, if you elevate yourself above the world 1,000 feet, and then you go 10,000 feet and you
Hmm.
go 1,000,000 miles away from the earth, those are all different perspectives. Right. And the further out that we can zoom, the more we kind of start to understand the bigger picture of everything. Kinda,
Hmm.
because it's an abyss
There's always
and
further back you can go.
there's always further back you can go. But the point is just starting. Move back a foot, move back an inch, whatever it is that you can do.
Hmm.
Because as we start doing that, you start to see things clearer is not necessarily the right word, but you start being able to understand some of these things better and seeing how they end up fitting together
Hmm.
in a bigger picture than
The
just the
contact.
little
You can see
tiny
the
piece.
context
Yeah.
when you pull out.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So there you go. There is how that murder can actually be a good thing. Uh, it all depends on your perspective and how you're looking at it. And the farther you go, at some point you realize, you know what? There is no good or bad. It just is. It's just a thing. And that good, that bad, that's all just us putting a judgment on it based on our experiences, our indoctrinations, our beliefs. But at the end of the day, it just is.
Mhm. And that is part of the spiritual path, is
Mhm.
having the perspective, right? Which is, again, the provocative question at the beginning is just
Mhm.
to get you to think, to get you
Yep.
to start to understand and reassess some of your beliefs, reassess kind of where you're at as well, um, so that you can continue to grow and understand and heal from some of these things. And most of the time, the understanding only comes after you've healed.
Mhm.
People want the understanding before. Usually, the understanding comes after you have healed, uh, because
Yeah.
then you can really make a lot more sense of it. So just keep
Mhm.
healing, withhold judgment, realize there's a bigger plan at play, focusing on seeing things as opportunities instead of challenges, and just push through and grow.
Yeah. Okay. Um, with that, we will leave you with a lot of things to think about this week. Uh, you're welcome. Uh,
Maybe they're not
definitely.
saying thank you, Brad. They're like, oh, fun.
You know what? If they take a step back with a different perspective, they will be thanking us.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's if you're not, if you're cursing at us, maybe that's what you need to do. You need to take a couple steps back, and then when you finally are able to say, "Okay, thank you guys, I appreciate that," then we'll talk again. So,
Yep. Yep. Perfect. Perfect.
in the meantime, I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll catch you guys on our next episode.
All right. See you, everybody.